Hey guys, wow, you're lying in bed, half asleep, when you hear it. Not a knock, a thud, a smash. The sound of your door cracking against its hinges. Boots scatter down the hallway like war drums. Someone screams. Someone sobs. You scramble for your phone, but the signal's jammed. And when you rush to your baby's room, the crib is empty. This wasn't supposed to happen. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your city and local time in the comments. I want to know where this story is finding you, and let's go on the journey of today's story together. You trudge through the debris of your own hallway. A sneaker is lying sideways in the chaos your son's. The lights outside flash red, white, and blue, but it feels more like sirens at a crime scene than anything patriotic. You live in a residential neighborhood in Phoenix, Arizona, just off Van Buren Street. You don't know it yet, but tonight your house is one of nearly 1,000 across 12 states hit by ICE's newly deployed Operation Safeguard. They don't leave notices anymore, just zip ties, just shadows. Sometimes not even a name, just a mistake, a hunch, or a grudge. One guy in Houston had his front door torn off because he shared a first name with someone else on the list. He wasn't undocumented. He was a Lyft driver. In a bizarre footnote to the night, ICE's official X, formerly Twitter account, retweets a congratulatory meme of a tactical officer next to an eagle with the caption, "No days off for freedom." It gets ratioed by midnight. And if you're wondering why you never saw any of this on your local news, well, the outlets were tipped after the operation began. By then, the only reporters left on site were neighbors with phones, stunned behind curtains, watching lives dissolve like fog. You scroll through your feed, and buried between cooking reels and football memes, there it is, a press release from ICE, dated July 14, 2025. Operation Safeguard, an integrated enforcement initiative to enhance national security. The words sound neutral enough, integrated, initiative, enhance. But then you read on. 23,000 names, 23,000 targets, no warrants required, no trial pending. Most are simply suspected removable aliens. That's the new legalese. You wonder when they stop saying people. The plan was announced internally just 2 weeks earlier. Field offices in Los Angeles, Chicago, Houston, Atlanta, and New York were given quotas. Yes, actual numerical quotas. Officers referred to them as harvest targets, a term that leaked through a Freedom of Information Act request filed by the Marshall Project. The official line? These were high-priority individuals with significant criminal histories. The reality? Data from TRAC showed otherwise, but more on that soon. ICE partnered with local law enforcement in some cities, bypassing others that had declared themselves sanctuary jurisdictions. In Minneapolis, officers reportedly dressed in Amazon delivery uniforms to lure suspects outside. In Miami, ICE's mobile units were seen scanning license plates at grocery store lots. No court orders, just AI surveillance software purchased through a Homeland Security grant in 2024. A retired federal judge, interviewed by CNN the day after the raids, called the operation a constitutional coin toss. And while ICE defended their actions, citing national security threats amid a rising border crisis, they declined to release demographic breakdowns of those arrested. But leaked internal memos shared with ProPublica told the story. 82% had no violent crime record. Half had U.S.-born children. Some were DACA recipients whose paperwork had simply lapsed during pandemic delays. Strangely, buried within the ICE.gov homepage the same week under community programs was a banner celebrating National Diversity Week, a smiling family, 3 flags waving behind them. None of them the people you watch get pulled from their front yards in socks. You remember Cecilia. Everyone did. She was that quiet soul in apartment 3C at the end of the hallway, always polite, always late for work, always clutching her toddler Mateo's hand like the world was slippery. You'd passed her just the day before, arms full of groceries, keys dangling between her teeth, whispering something gentle in Spanish. The next morning, her door was wide open, Mateo, no more than 2 years old, was sitting on the carpet in his diaper, crying softly and holding a juice pouch. The neighbor across the hall, Mrs. Bingham, filmed it all from her phone. The ICE agents wore dark windbreakers and had no visible badges. They said Cecilia matched a target from Guatemala. But she wasn't Guatemalan. She was born in El Salvador and had been waiting on her asylum hearing for over 13 months, delayed twice due to backlogs. She had a valid work permit, paid her taxes, and attended every check-in with ICE's Enforcement and Removal Operations Office downtown. Still, they took her. No explanation, no phone call allowed, no one to take Mateo. It was Mrs. Bingham who called Child Protective Services. For 48 hours, no one could locate Cecilia. The ICE detention line played classical hold music and disconnected twice. Her lawyer, Luis Ortega, posted a desperate video to TikTok that went viral. She's not a criminal. She's a preschool teacher. Why are we criminalizing mothers? Later that week, an ICE spokesperson gave a briefing outside their field office in Joliet, Illinois. There may have been a clerical mismatch, he admitted. We'll conduct an internal review. Meanwhile, Cecilia sat in a cold detention facility in Indiana, hundreds of miles from her son. No diapers, no updates, just a thin foil blanket and fluorescent lights that never shut off. The clip of Mateo crying on the floor, his little arms reaching toward a door already closed, circulated on Instagram. One post from a DACA youth group read, "This is what Operation Safeguard really means. Not law, just loss." You dig through the data. TRAC immigration's reports don't lie, they never have. They're dry, numbers first, unsentimental. But if you've ever cared about what policy looks like when it lands in your living room, this is where the truth lives. According to the July 2025 report, 23,429 individuals were targeted under Operation Safeguard. Of those, 18,967 were actually apprehended. But here's the kicker. Over 81% had no criminal convictions whatsoever, not even a parking violation. ICE's internal classification labeled 12,305 of them as non-priority, but they were swept anyway. Why? Because prioritization was only a suggestion, not a rule, not when the quotas loomed and arrests meant federal funding. An odd footnote in ICE's public-facing release stated that Operation Safeguard should not be construed as discriminatory. The operation employed neutral selection algorithms. You dig further. That algorithm, built by a subcontractor out of Virginia using DMV records, credit reporting anomalies, and predictive analytics based on zip codes. In short, a glorified spreadsheet with a bias problem. One tech reviewer from Wired dissected the back-end code in a leaked internal ICE manual. Their machine learning model uses historical arrest patterns to assign probability risk, which means the future is dictated by the past, regardless of innocence. In practice, this translated to Latino and Southeast Asian neighborhoods flagged twice as often. A family in Long Beach was raided because their apartment lease had 3 co-signers with similar surnames. None were undocumented, but the system didn't care. Meanwhile, ICE's enforcement budget for 2025 ballooned to $8.3 billion, a 22% increase from 2024. Most of it went into transportation contracts, private detention facilities, and data infrastructure. One lesser-known line item? Media preparedness training. ICE officials reportedly spent $430,000 on workshops teaching agents how to frame enforcement actions in family-friendly language. TRAC's final line in the report hits like a punch. There appears to be no meaningful relationship between criminality and selection criteria in the majority of these raids. It's a sentence that belongs in courtrooms, classrooms, and here in your story. You sit back and try to balance it. The scale is tipping, but maybe you're missing something. Maybe there's another side. ICE's defenders, many of them career officials, say this was never about cruelty. It's about order, insists one former director on Fox News. Without a system, we have chaos. What about the victims of crimes committed by undocumented immigrants? What about the rule of law? You've heard that before. You've seen the interviews, the talking points. You understand the fear that fuels them. And yes, somewhere in the 23,000 names, there were individuals with serious criminal records, people wanted for fraud, domestic abuse, or gang affiliation. But TRAC's database makes clear they were the exception, not the rule. The vast majority were caregivers, restaurant workers, warehouse pickers, elderly grandmothers, young teens aging out of DACA's protections. So you ask yourself, was the net too wide? Is public safety achieved by removing those whose only crime is overstaying a visa or missing an immigration court date, lost in COVID-era delays? Opponents of the operation, including multiple former DHS officials, point to the inefficiency and moral hazard of mass sweeps. The bluntness of these raids undermines community trust, says a report from the Migration Policy Institute. People are less likely to report crimes, cooperate with law enforcement, or seek medical care. Fear becomes a contagion. In an op-ed for The Guardian, a former ICE agent anonymously confesses, "We were told to ignore the sob stories, but when a child grabs your belt and begs you not to take their dad, you remember that, even years later." And still, the operation was legal. That's the thorny truth. Operation Safeguard was signed off by DHS, reviewed by Federal Legal Counsel, and praised by the Senate Judiciary Subcommittee on Border Security. Legality, it seems, doesn't always mean morality. Back in Chicago, Cecilia remains in custody, her asylum file still pending, her son bouncing between temporary guardianship and night terrors, all while the country debates whether she's a threat or simply invisible. You notice the change not on television or in press briefings, but in the whispers at the grocery store, the classrooms with too many empty chairs, the laundromats where no one talks anymore. The impact of Operation Safeguard isn't theoretical, it's visceral. In Los Angeles, a school counselor at Boyle Heights Middle says that after the raids, her attendance dropped by 22% in 1 week. Not because the kids were sick, but because their parents were afraid they wouldn't come back if they walked them to school. Some children stopped showing up entirely. Teachers organized quiet carpool chains, driving students in unmarked cars to avoid detection. In Houston, a food pantry run by a Vietnamese Catholic church reports its highest turnout in 2 years. But people don't talk while waiting in line anymore. They don't ask for help, they whisper their names, if they give them at all. It's like a ghost town with full streets, says Father Tom, the parish priest, whose own cousin was taken during a sweep that confused 2 nearly identical surnames. In New Jersey, a Somali rideshare driver files a civil suit. He was pulled over on a routine traffic checkpoint and detained for 6 days. His documents were in order, but his cousin's same last name was on ICE's list. Even after proving his identity, he missed a week of work, lost his apartment, and now couch surfs with friends who check the blinds every 15 minutes. Meanwhile, local hospitals begin noticing a drop in immigrant patients even for serious emergencies. One undocumented woman in Atlanta refused to bring her child in for pneumonia until the fever spiked dangerously high. She feared ICE would be waiting in the ER. The child survived, but barely. And still, no one would officially talk on record. One oddly haunting scene. In a Facebook post from Albuquerque, a playground sits full of toys, slides, swings, chalk-covered sidewalks. Not a single child. Someone comments, "It's like they vanished." But they didn't vanish. They were taken, or hidden, or too terrified to move. You sit by the window now, hours after the headlines have faded, and the silence is louder than the raids. You wonder not just what ICE is doing, but what we're becoming. The law used to feel like a guardrail, not a blade. But now, with every knock, every click of a zip tie, it feels more like something primal dressed in policy. The philosopher Hannah Arendt once warned of the banality of evil, that the greatest cruelties aren't committed by monsters, but by clerks filing paperwork. And here we are, deportation by spreadsheet, family separation by algorithm, justice processed like an invoice. You read in The Independent that the ICE field officer in charge of Operation Safeguard's Midwest branch received a commendation just 1 week after the sweeps began. His LinkedIn profile, still public, lists operational efficiency expert as a skill. Below it, family man, soccer coach. That's the contradiction that haunts you. The system isn't made of villains. It's made of ordinary people following bad orders, emboldened by systems that refuse to ask why. One agent posted anonymously on Reddit's r/ICE Watch, "It's not like we enjoy this, but orders are orders. Besides, it's legal." Is legality enough? You ask yourself this as you replay the footage of Cecilia's child abandoned on the floor. You think of your own family, how your grandmother used to carry her green card like a shield, how your uncle would flinch every time a cop drove by, even years after becoming a citizen. And you realize we don't measure justice by how the law treats the guilty. We measure it by how it treats the innocent. In Seattle, a group of high school students writes an open letter to their city council. If our classmates don't feel safe, it says, none of us are free. It gets shared over 1 million times, a spark in the dark. Remember that number, 23,000. It's not abstract. It's the size of a small town. It's the distance between enforcement and erasure. You stand up. You've sat through the numbers, the footage, the heartbreak, and now the question presses down harder than ever. What can you actually do? You don't have a badge. You don't write policy. Maybe you don't even know anyone directly affected, but you have something else witness. One ICE officer anonymously told NPR, they hope no one pays attention. That's the secret. These raids are loud in the room and silent in the news. So that's where you come in. Make noise. Be the disruption. Start by sharing this story. Not for views, not for clicks, but for someone who hasn't been seen yet. You can call your city council and ask about local sanctuary protections. You can check if your school district has MOU agreements with ICE. You can volunteer at shelters, bring coffee to legal aid offices, or offer rides to court dates for people who have no other way to get there. You can challenge the language. When someone calls it law and order, ask them what law justifies pulling a woman from her preschool classroom mid-lesson. Ask them what order it is that leaves a toddler crying on the floor. In New Mexico, after a series of aggressive raids in early July, a group of abuelas formed La Red del Sol, a phone tree hotline warning families about ICE activity in their area. They've prevented over 200 detainments. These women aren't activists. They're retired grocery clerks, gardeners, bus drivers, but they know that silence is surrender. And if you're thinking, but I'm just one person, remember, every fire starts with friction. Every system that abuses power counts on your fatigue. So don't give them that. Stay watching. Keep questioning. And when someone tells you it's not your fight, tell them it became your fight the moment 23,000 people disappeared while the rest of the country scrolled past. You're here now, and that matters. You breathe in now, slower than before. The air doesn't feel so loud. The lights are softer, not because anything has changed, but because you've seen something clearly. Something raw, something real. The noise of the raids fades behind you like a bad dream. The clatter of handcuffs, the staccato flash of squad lights on brick walls, the silence left behind in empty apartments, all of it recedes. What remains are echoes, not just of fear, but of memory. Of the kind of memory that reshapes your lens, so you'll never scroll past those headlines the same way again. You imagine Cecilia, finally reunited with Mateo, maybe months from now, her arms wrapped tight around him like thread pulling a torn world back together. You picture the abuelas of La Red del Sol sipping tea at a kitchen table, quietly recharging before the next call. You think of that child in Boyle Heights walking back into class, unsure if today her mom will still be home. And you're part of this now. That's what bearing witness does. It inducts you. It invites you to carry something, not the trauma, but the truth. So take that with you as you log off, as the screen dims, as the quiet returns. Take with you the question that refuses to let go. How many more names before we say enough? Let your discomfort do its work. Let it soften you. Let it sharpen you. And when you hear someone say, that's just how it is, remember, every system that ever changed began with someone who said, no, it isn't. This story may be ending, but yours doesn't have to. Share it, speak it, shape what comes next. Sleep gently tonight, but don't forget,